Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Golan Moskowitz, and I am an associate professor of Jewish studies at Tulane University and also a core faculty member in our Grant Center for the American Jewish Experience. I am a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and I teach and research partially about what children and grandchildren of survivors do in terms of the creative meaning making that they are made to are made to confront in their own lives and work. So specifically, I teach Holocaust literature and film, and I have written about how grandchildren of survivors use literature to work through some of the tangles of the past and their relationship to that past. And we're so fortunate to have Dara here today. We chatted earlier, and I had a chance to watch the film before we came together tonight. And I'll have a few questions to pose to you, Dara, for us to get things started today. Inked is a film that looks at how grandchildren of survivors who choose to have the tattoo number of their Auschwitz survivor grandparents placed on their own bodies as a way of perpetuating memory. And this is something that I admire about what your film does, is that it doesn't seek to preach, it doesn't seek to take a firm stance on the ethics of this practice, and we see within the film itself Holocaust survivors, community educators and rabbis, descendants of survivors, speaking about the different angles that could be considered around this practice. Right? Some see it as a potential perpetuation of the dehumanizing logic of those who were branded with numbers, whose identities were taken from them in Auschwitz. And others see it as an especially meaningful way to embody memory in a way that maybe a history book or a testimony would be maybe less effective in doing. So I'm really interested to ask you first, I'll ask you a little bit about the specific forms of meaning that your subjects derive from the experience of these tattoos, but specifically first, I'd love to know about the origin story of the film. How did you encounter these tattoos in the first place, the phenomenon, and what led you to make a film about it? And then a caveat to that, there was a film a little over 14 years ago. Inked is your film, but there was a film called Numbered from 2012 in Israel by Uriel Sinai and Dana Doron, which deals with a similar concept. And I'm curious if you had seen that film and how your film, almost 15 years later, is potentially in conversation with that.
First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm so honored to be here. And I also want to start off by thanking audiences, because we make films to share them, so there's nothing more validating to be here in an audience and have this opportunity to share the work with you. I had seen an ad for the Queen's Conference, and they were honoring grants about Holocaust education and Holocaust-focused films. At the same time, I had a friend who's a professor who was teaching and doing a research project about how tattoos are a form of healing trauma. That is, tattoos for women who had undergone mastectomies, LGBTQ plus getting pink triangles. And she was also focusing on Holocaust research and how third generation of grandchildren of survivors were choosing to tattoo themselves with the numbers as a way of honoring legacy. You know, Holocaust survivors are dying out. There aren't many left that can tell their own stories. So the questions that I was curious to explore was, how do we tell the stories for a generation that are not here, or not going to be here to tell their own stories? At the same time, I was also very much intrigued by the notion that, like, we are a modern generation that uses emojis to tell stories. We are going to graphics, and I was really interested in how tattoos have become a language, how we've kind of moved on from like oral storytelling to written to now a graphic sense of storytelling. In all my films that I've done, to your earlier point, I try not to take sides. I am not interested in like creating a PSA for tattooing or an expose that I'm against it. I just love the idea of exploring something that, as I felt, I had never heard about it. Let's just see what the conversation is, to do it, to not do it, the whys, the no's, and I just hope that it resonates with audience in the sense that they leave this room and just have a conversation. To the point of Numbered, I had seen Numbered, it's an older film, and I felt that for one, they had a lot of Holocaust survivors that were able to participate. I didn't have that fortune. There's very few left that are able to speak to the Holocaust, and I think that's kind of the point of this film, is we featured less subjects, but hoping that we would kind of embrace their stories and their regions a little bit more and follow their journey. And I really wanted to explore the idea of how do we preserve legacy.
Thank you. And so speaking to those individual subjects that we'll hear from in a few minutes, there's clearly something about holding memory in one's body or on one's body that means so much to them in this film. And I'm curious, from your experience interviewing them, deeply getting to know them, how would you describe that embodied dimension of Holocaust memory? What did you learn about the effects for them of carrying their ancestor, their grandparents' number on their body?
So I think you'll hear in the film that tattoos tell stories. The literal idea that how do we preserve legacy, and in this case, it's actually literally on the skin. I think that, in modern, it's just the idea of and I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask from the beginning of the question again. What was the earlier part of the question?
So there's something.
The embodiment of the skin. I am really interested in the idea of language and how do we preserve the stories. And the idea that in a tattoo, it could just be that I like this image, but there's also something more, that maybe it's a conversation starter. I spoke to a lot of third generation Holocaust survivors. That's what we're going to see on camera. And I think there is something about not being a 2G survivor, 2G being the children of Holocaust survivors, but being third generation Holocaust survivors, has enough distance that you can say, I'm not a victim, I want to be a survivor. And so there is a little bit more of a look at me, kind of, I'm going to own this. I'm not trying to hide from it. And I think that's what they all embody. They're all very different. You'll see they range the gamut in terms of their beliefs politically, religiously. But what they have in common is this notion that I have this tattoo, stop me, let's have a conversation, ask me why I have it.
And I think there's something so key to what you said about the generational distance involved in third generation versus second, and this idea sometimes that what the child wishes to forget of the parent's difficult past, the grandchild wishes to remember or to conjure up. And also this idea that the child of survivors, often in the narratives of the second generation, we see narratives of what it meant to survive the survivors, to deal with the household in which a parent maybe woke up screaming from nightmares, or who hoarded food, or who's overprotective, etc. But in the third generation, sometimes there's a bit more distance, like you're describing, which also leads, the distance also leads to gaps and to lack of knowledge, the need to imagine, to invent, to creatively re-inhabit something that feels so far away, which the tattoo, I think, is one manifestation of. And so this is a short film, 22 minutes, so in a shorter film you obviously have to leave out a lot, but it's clear to me that you had some very substantive conversations, that you spoke for hours with your subjects, you did a lot of research. What stories or moments, specific examples do you maybe wish you could have included had there been more time?
So firstly, I did choose to focus on third generation, the grandchildren. I did interview, pre-interview I should say, so not actually left on the floor of the edit room footage, but made a decision early on to not include any what we call 2G, the children of survivors, because I did feel like, and I don't want to generalize too much, but their stories were more just about moving on, like assimilating life as much as you can have the American dream. The third generation had enough removal that they were like a little bit more, look at me, I've got a tattoo. And so I focus on the grandchildren and that shared experience of inheriting trauma, but having enough distance to do something about it. I received this grant 2 weeks before October 7th. And at the time I hadn't signed the contract that you have to sign to receive the funds. And I thought, oh my God, they're not gonna give it to me. Like, there's more important things going on in the world. Who cares about tattoos? And then I started hearing so much about tattooing and all, like, more Jews saying, look at me, I got a tattoo that says, we'll dance again, or it was becoming more prevalent. I was getting so many texts from friends about tattooing, especially Jews in Israel. And I interviewed all my subjects about October 7th, and the only thing that I did choose to include was the notion of rising anti-Semitism and and having the numbers as a marked, I'm a Jew. But I chose, because I had the limitation of a short film, I felt that that was just taking us out of the Holocaust story. And I really wanted to focus on how do we preserve legacy, which I think is something we can extrapolate whether you're Jewish or not. How do we preserve stories for a generation not here to tell their own? And I really wanted to focus on tattoos as a language. So I didn't go there in the way I stayed in my lane. You'll see Pinchas, who's one of the Holocaust survivors. He talks about his prayer for peace, and he says, inequity is happening all around the world, and I just want it to stop. That is my prayer. What he really says, and I toyed with this a lot in the edit room of whether we included it. He says inequity is happening in Gaza, it's happening in Ukraine, it's happening in Israel post October 7th. I think he named one other country. And we weren't sure whether we should list the countries, and ultimately I thought, okay, well that hopefully one day that dates the film, and we're beyond that and there's peace, and also let audiences for themselves identify with what inequity in the world means for their own personal responses. And so I just said, let's just keep it to it's happening in the world, and we can fill in the blanks however we feel or identify with the film.
Final question real quick. So because your film productively doesn't take a stark stance one way or another, you're interested in showing different perspectives around the issue, I think it's a great conversation starter, a great film to leave meditating, contemplating, speaking with friends, family about memory, about history, about embodiment over generations, holding difficult histories as they evolve over time. Are there any particular questions or conversations that you hope audiences will leave with today?
I just wanted to linger. I think the notion of how do we tell stories, how do we preserve legacy is interesting. Whether it's tattoos or whatever the next form of art might be down the road. And I also, when I heard about it, I had my own preconceived notions of what that was or who was doing it. I said to my friend, oh, are they 16-year-olds? Who's getting these tattoos? And they, third generation survivors at this point are in their 50s. Their mothers, their fathers, their siblings. They're not kids. And I had to challenge my own preconceived notions about it. And so I just want to kind of shine a light on something a little bit out of the ordinary and just hope that it lingers.
Well, with that, I hope it lingers. I hope it's meaningful. And with all of you, please thank Dara for being here today, and we hope you enjoyed the film. Thank you.
I will be here after. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to me. I'm happy to answer them for you. And thank you again so much. And to Film Independent and New Orleans Film Society and the French Film Festival for having me. I'm really honored to be here.